This is I Don't Speak German. Here we talk about the far right, their fellow travellers, and what they say to each other when they think we're not listening. The show is hosted by Daniel Harper and me, Jack Graham. We're both he, him. Be aware, we cover difficult, sometimes nasty subject matter, so content warnings always apply. Hello, everybody, and welcome to an I Don't Speak German news brief episode. We're going to be just because some of you have reached out to both of us a little, but mostly to Daniel, who's here, by the way. Hello, Daniel.
Hello, Jack. I'm here.
He is here. You just heard it, so it's true. And I'm Jack Graham, obviously. So yeah, people have reached out to Daniel, and even to a lesser extent me, sort of asking for our takes on recent things that have happened, because if you weren't aware of this, things have been happening out there in the world. So yeah, we thought we'd chuck together a news brief, which is really just going to be a take brief, really, for you on the whole sort of general of everything. So Daniel, how are you doing out there in the old US of states?
Well, somebody tried to assassinate the next probable, I don't know, president of the United States, and that's been going swimmingly. The media has not at all been like lighting its hair on fire over this.
Hasn't in any way just gone completely fucking insane.
Right. Yes, exactly. And I know on our most recent bonus episode about Independence Day, we did talk about the Biden debate and his absolutely a horrendous performance, and certainly Biden appearing to be, at least in terms of the media narrative, and we could talk about this, it's more complicated, but Biden appearing to be a doddering fool while people are taking pot shots at Donald Trump, and he gets up and yells, "Fight, fight, fight," while literally bloodied from a bullet that just whizzed past his ear. That's certainly not something that, will influence possibly an election that's going to happen in a few months. So yeah, we should just talk about that a little bit. So
go ahead. I mean, what do you think? What do you think this is going to swing it for Trump?
And my immediate thought was, and I think I did a blue sky. What are we calling it? Are we calling him Skeets? Do I have to call him Skeets?
I guess. I suppose so.
Okay. I did a Skeets, which was just kind of I don't remember the exact wording, but it was very much the propaganda value of this is overwhelming. This may very well have just sunk the election for Trump. I don't know. We really haven't seen polling on anything like this, and obviously things are going to change a lot before November. I mean, we're still several months out. I think it is. My guess would be it is now Trump's to lose. My guess is it is now Trump's to lose. Is a lot of those independents, a lot of those people who are swaying already after the debate performance and after sort of the media around the debate performance are now going to be, more inclined to, vote for the other guy. And obviously what we're talking about is a very small handful of quote unquote independent voters in a handful of states. But one of those states is Indiana, or one of those states is Pennsylvania, where the assassination attempt happened. And the other, another one is Ohio, where, we will talk about J.D. Vance is now the official vice presidential nominee for Donald Trump. And I don't know, this is everything, everything's coming at Milhouse right now. Everything's coming at Trump right now. And, I don't give electoral advice. I mean, obviously nobody's listening to me, but I think Biden really has to do something serious to turn this around. I just don't know that. I think the momentum is all on that side right now. And, again, things can change, but it's hard for me to imagine just go with the flow and, be the calm, steady voice, is going to win this at this point, So yeah, I think it's very possible that we end up with a Trump presidency. And I don't think it will be solely based on this, but I think it's entirely possible. So
it can be very hard to tell the difference between sort of a genuine drift or mood or sway in political events and media artifacts, just how the media are vibing. Obviously, the media do get themselves narratives, and they just write that narrative or play that narrative, no matter what the reality is. And I think we are seeing a lot of that. I mean, what is your take on Biden's atrocious performance in the debate? Do you think that's actually a sign of mental incompetence?
I think he's just old, honestly. Like I think
Yeah,
he's 82. The presidency takes it out on people. If you look at Barack Obama after his first four, especially after 8 years, if you look at, Bill Clinton was a young president, you look at him after, 8 years. They do not look like they are 8 years older. They look like they're 20 years older. It's just, it is for everything that we can talk about, the evils of the American presidency, the imperial, all the other nonsense. It is a job that takes it is incredibly, incredibly stressful. It is incredibly stressful. It is a very, very, very difficult job to manage this empire and to be in the head of that. And Biden was kind of old and tired in 2000 when he ran. Like that was kind of the big thing against him then. He talked a lot. Well, and this is something that's kind of come up recently is that he never actually said, I'm going to be a one-term president. And nobody from on his team officially said, I'm going to be a one-term president. But like kind of after they after they sort of crushed the Bernie campaign by just bringing all the centrist Democrats together and just sort of there were definitely news articles and sort of feelers that came out of oh, we see this as transitional. We see this, and nobody ever really spoke on the record. And so they get to talk out both sides of their mouth on this. But, I think it would have been very reasonable for Joe Biden to come in and say, I'm the guy, I'm obviously the guy we're going to unite behind. I am going to come through this. I'm going to be the voice of reason. I'm going to be the voice of stability. I'm going to beat Trump. And then basically now we're going to find the next person. We're going to use the next 4 years to sort of really push for a changing of the guards, and we will anoint successors at the end of this process. And I think there was a very real possibility for that. But honestly, from everything I see, Biden's own, I mean, he's got an ego about himself now, particularly after he won in 2020. Is and this is from reporting I've seen around it. I obviously don't know Joe Biden. I have no but everything I've seen is that he believes he is the only person who can beat Donald Trump in 2024. And I think that's ludicrous, but that's what he believes. And he's just not going to step down. I think the time to talk about this was 4 years ago. I think the time to talk about this was 2 years ago. If after the 2022 midterms there had been, all right, now I want there to be an actual primary. We are going to, and if I am the one who is picked, then great, but there should be a primary process. And I think the administration really should have put should have put all those irons in the fire. The time to do this is not mid-July before the election. It's just not the time to do it. So I don't know. They did the debate. I think they wanted that debate to prove that Biden was was sharp and he was on it and he was going to be able to, and it just crashed and burned. I don't know. I don't know. I'm sorry. I'm kind of agree with Ezra Klein on this, and I hate to say the words I agree with Ezra Klein on this. Is that Joe Biden is probably a very competent administrator. He's a very competent chief executive in the sense of he can make decisions. He can do what he needs to do. He surrounds himself with the right people. Everything that we've seen from the administration is that he actually does he brings in the left wing of the party. He brings in the centrists. He brings in the right wing of the party and makes decisions based on what's best for the party and what's best for, sort of moving forward. But he believes he's the only person who can do that. And I think that that's a shame because Joe Biden would have had the opportunity if he had decided in 2022, okay, no, I'm gonna step aside and let somebody else kind of take over the reins, and we're gonna do a primary process. He could have gone into the sunset as someone who really did the right thing. That level. He could have been revered for, I know my time is up. It is time to build the younger people in this party and to really build something for the future. And they're just not interested in that. And he's not interested in that. And so that's for me, I don't think it's dementia. I don't think we see signs of dementia. Obviously, you can't diagnose that from a television performance. I think he's old. I think he's tired at night. I think, you see him in the middle of the day. He's a lot sharper. He's a lot more with it. And I don't think that's a sundown effect necessarily. It might be. But what I saw on the stage was just, he's old. He's tired. You know what? I get to 11 o'clock and I'm tired too. And I'm in my mid 40s. It's it's a thing, it's not I don't know. This doesn't have to be complicated to me. So sorry. I think I answered 4 questions when you asked one, but yeah, no, that's kind of my overall sense of it,
Hey, that's just efficiency. I ask one question, you answer 4. It helps us get through it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think he has dementia. I don't think he has Alzheimer's, as you say. I think he's just an older man, and he has, and as you say, similarly, everybody gets names mixed up and stuff like that, and it gets worse as you get older. It's the surface level sort of short term memory thing. It gets a little bit weaker. That's all it is. You listen to him answering questions about foreign policy, the NATO press conferences at the NATO summit. He's you know he's talking about something that he's clearly very invested in there, sort of foreign policy triangulation, playing China and Russia off against each other and stuff like that. He's completely on the ball. This is not a senile person. He knows what he's talking about. It's cynical imperial brinksmanship, but he's making sense when he talks about it.
Yeah, I mean, you can say he's evil and not believe that he's demented. I mean, these are two different things, right?
Yeah. But then, of course, he accidentally says, Vice President Trump instead of Vice President Harris, and that's what the media run. Because, as I say, the media have their story, and they're storytellers fundamentally, and they just want to tell their story. And I think this whole thing is an illustration, or it's an illustration of the gap between the actual grasp that centrist liberals and establishment centrist liberal Democrats and stuff like that have on things, and their sort of fantasy version of themselves. I think the debate is a perfect example of that. They said, right, we're going to be terribly serious minded and be politically serious about this. We're going to insist upon this debate where there's no audience and the mics are cut off when you're not speaking and stuff like that. So we can really have a serious debate instead of the normal sort of televised audience, gladiatorial sort of rhetoric back and forth thing. No, we'll get to the substance. We'll be very wonkish and West Wing and idealized about this whole thing and do it seriously. And that's how we'll win. And of course, it was a catastrophe for Joe Biden because their politics is actually no more sensible or serious or grown up than the politics of the other side. And part of the catastrophe of that debate is that he's gabbling pre-prepared talking points at the mic.
Mm-hmm.
He's just mentioning that they brought the price of insulin down every possible time he can. So the whole idea that Biden was going to be a one-term,
like a placeholder,
skewered president, where they choose the next generation. That's an example of the whole sort of thing, and it's also an example of the whole thing of the media just dreaming up a narrative and then running with it. As you said, the Biden team never said they were going to do anything like that at all.
I fully believe there were people going off the rushing, going well, what I'm being told is he's going to be a one-term president, and that's kind of how you feed these narratives into the media. And I think you're right. I think that people kind of ran away with it. Although I don't know that it wasn't a big story. I just saw it a bunch on to allay the fears of when the Bernie coalition was just crushed, right? And to be no, we're gonna and to assuage the fears about his age and all that sort of thing. And it turns out that 4 years later, all that stuff is still there because he didn't actually solve the problem, and that's, and this is ultimately political. This is an electoral question, not a policy question. I mean, one of the things that's just true about the American presidency is that, it's not Biden as a human being. Biden could be an old man in a chair doing nothing. It's the apparatus around him. It's all the people around him making lower level decisions. Ultimately he has to make decisions about big picture stuff, but it is about this apparatus, and it is because of that apparatus is for all of the problems I have with Joe Biden and with the Democratic Party, we will be better off with a Democrat in office in 2025 than a Republican in office. And that's true of any, whatever name you want to fill in the hat. So I'm fine, just kind of stating that, by definition, we're better off with Democrats in office on almost 100% of issues. There's a handful of things where maybe that's not true, but for 99% of people who are listening to my voice, you are better off with a Democrat in charge. Believe me. That said, yeah. I mean, it does matter. It does matter that, Biden just seems to be unable to run for this office. And, it's almost any one of the people in 2020 would be better at that. Kamala Harris would have done better in that debate than Joe Biden did. Just, she's not as old. She's more with it. She actually held a job. She was a prosecutor. That's a terrible job to have, but she held a job, a real job. 10 years ago, she had an actual job. Mayor Pete. I despise Mayor Pete. Mayor Pete would have absolutely washed the floor with with Donald Trump at that moment. Like, you know, I mean that the
Yeah,
debate
there isn't.
performance, the debate performance is a Joe Biden problem, not a Democrat problem. You know,
Yeah.
although
And yet there isn't much support in polling for the idea that any other candidate is going to do much better, against Trump.
yeah, no,
The polls come back and they say, well, how does Kamala Harris do in against Trump, or Mayor Pete or whoever, nobody's saying, oh, well, if it was this candidate instead of Biden, you know.
right.
And I think, and again, an awful lot of sort of media storytelling and fantasizing is going on about this. I mean, my opinion is that it would be craziness to pick another candidate now with only 4 months to go. I think that would be electoral suicide. I
Yeah,
think no matter
again, the time to do it was like a year and a half ago. That was the time to really to make that decision. And at this point, it's too fucking late. And that is entirely a problem the Democratic Party and the executive branch and Joe Biden and the people around him have brought on themselves. Like they thought they could weaken it Bernie's this through, and it turns out, or weaken it Joe's this through. You shouldn't use Bernie in this context, but they thought they could weaken it Joe's this through, and we will see if they're correct. I really hope they are correct. My life was going to be made significantly worse in 4 months if they are wrong.
And
but
they're also under the I mean, we're talking about this sort of West Wing fantasy version of centrist Democratic Party liberalism. They're laboring under these delusions where they can do this thing where they can point out to the public, well, the stock market keeps on breaking records, and people are going to say, oh, well, in that case, I'm not all that worried about the fact that I struggle to make rent even with 3 jobs,
right,
because the economy is doing well.
Yeah, no, I mean like rent and all that stuff. And I see people like are talking about like grocery prices. I don't know. I haven't noticed that grocery prices have been going up. Maybe it's just what I buy. I don't buy a lot of prepackaged stuff. I buy a lot of, basic ingredients because I actually know how to cook. So, it's a different, but I haven't seen like the price of like, eggs and like bacon and stuff. I haven't seen those prices like skyrocketing. So I don't know. Like it's a whole different thing. Anyway, that's a complete different topic, but you know what I mean? Like
we've talked more than once about with reference to, and this is kind of a good link with reference to the JFK assassination. We've talked about the phenomenon of people being able to say in conspiracy documentaries or whatever, oh, you can't recycle this rifle in less than this amount of time, right, while on camera actually recycling the rifle
in less than that time. Yes,
in less than that amount of time. Yeah, I think things like the price of groceries or just the buzzword inflation, they get turned into, again, it's storytelling. They get turned into sort of catchphrases and synecdoches where people whose grocery bill is not actually going up will be talking about, oh, grocery bills are through the roof, because it might not actually be a real thing. I mean, it is for millions of people, but for a lot of the people doing the talking, it isn't. But it's nonetheless, it's a trope in the story that's being told, I think.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's very middle America kind of thing to talk about, like grocery prices and gas prices. And I don't know, like I'm not above it all. I'm just kind of like, yeah, my grocery prices, maybe it's gone up by a couple of percent or something. But it doesn't feel like apocalyptic to me, like my grocery bill, and mostly what I see is like, I don't know, maybe the price of like sodas. Like I don't drink soda anymore. I don't drink like canned soda. Maybe those prices have gone up. And if so, I would completely believe that I'm just not noticing it because I'm just not buying the kinds of things that are really seeing the massive increases. Yeah. Anyway, that's that's completely off topic here. Yeah. But
it's a way for elites to account for what is to them the absolutely mystifying, unpopularity of Joe Biden. Well, how can Joe Biden be unpopular? He's the closest thing to our fantasy Democrat president. The right. Stock market's high and he's doing all this great stuff. The public don't like. Well, it must be because that they're worried about fuel bills and stuff like that.
I would say, honestly, the biggest thing for me that I see in terms of a bad economy is I haven't gotten a raise in a couple of years. I haven't gotten. I've been looking for a new job for quite a while, and like there just aren't that many jobs. And I am a pretty well qualified person. Like I could, I should be able to find to find better employment like relatively quickly. And it's not. It's not easy out there, and that's the kind of thing, and that's like structural things with the economy. that's stuff that like Joe Biden is definitely not like talking about. Like, if anything, they talk about like job retraining programs and that sort of thing. It's like, yeah, no, we just need more jobs, less AI, less, more, or a better social safety net. I would also accept that, I would go in the dole if that was, if that's the option is like, well, you're just not, you can't get a new job, but we'll give you assistance. We'll give you my, something to help you get by. All right, fair enough. I'll keep my shitty job and I'll, I'll take the government handout, and I'll keep making the podcast, which is what I really want to do full time anyway. But you know what I mean? It's a different thing. Anyway, we are well off topic at this point, but like, I think there is this, I think you're right about like the media narratives. And I think this is going to like kind of play into the other topics when I kind of get into here in this episode. So, and that it is ultimately very manufactured.
It's amazing how, for all that he is a complete idiot, it's amazing how attuned Trump is to precisely that, because he forces the Secret Service operatives that are trying to force him off the stage to stop so that he can go back to the podium and do his raised fist fight thing, and thus in the process creates this amazing photo.
That's amazing. That's the political instincts of a generation. Like, you're actually getting shot at about like, and there was some misreporting, or at least there was some confused reporting. Like at first I was seeing that people were saying like, no, a bullet hit the teleprompter, and then the glass from the teleprompter hit him. But like what I'm seeing now, at least from statements from the FBI, and of course I don't trust the FBI, but I've got nothing else to go on this, is, no, he was actually grazed by a bullet. That appears to be what actually happened.
All right. The last I heard was the shattered glass from the teleprompter version.
Apparently the teleprompters were not damaged, so that can't have been the answer. And I don't know why that sort of, it's one of those things, it's a fog of war thing. It just kind of pops up in the immediate and becomes a fact repeated. But I did go and kind of look at like official, I went and looked at a bunch of news stories, and I went and kind of and it does appear to be the FBI is now saying he was actually grazed by a bullet. And so, if he was actually hit in the ear by a 226, that's, an inch the other way, man. And we would be talking about very different things right now. This, I don't know. Let's not Fed post it in the slightest. I'm not going there, but like, man, this could have been a very different conversation. 1 inch to the left, that's all you needed.
What about the Secret Service failure here? This gigantic fucking empty roof just opposite the podium where he's going to be speaking.
There's a ton of conspiracizing around this, and
of course, immediately, like within seconds of it happening, the conspiracy theories are being.
It's not just an open roof. That was the staging area for the cops. He literally took a 50-foot ladder, which he had purchased that morning, along with like 50 rounds of this ammunition.
No. That was curtain rods. It was just curtain rods, Daniel.
He literally took a 50-foot ladder, leaned it up against the place where the cops are hanging out, the place where they're like staging all their activity. He climbs the ladder, and then that's where he's setting up. Like, this is absurd. Like, this is like, and like, I do not believe any I think that the cops really were that incompetent. I think that, one of the things with like open carry laws, and one of the things with, is Pennsylvania is an open carry state. He could legally carry that rifle. He could legally carry that wherever he wanted to, outside of like certain like super high security things, or like private security and that sort of thing. But like the cops, you walk up to a cop carrying that thing, they have no reason, without any like, other evidence, like for instance, if he was black, they would definitely not let him carry that around. But, it's just amazing that like that it's that on the nose, is that like that's the spot he ended up going to. It's you can't write this, you just cannot write this. It's
no conspiracies required when it's when the obvious explanation is the incompetence of cops and feds.
Right,
that's more than sufficient as a parsimonious explanation. I mean, even so, fucking hell.
I mean, all we had to look at is Uvalde, it's like, cops like playing on their phones and using hand sanitizer while children are like dying in their own, screaming in their own blood, and then when it's Donald Trump, suddenly somebody leaps into action. But like, apparently one of the cops like climbed the ladder, and the kid like shot at the cop, or at least like, brandished the gun towards the cop, and that's how they kind of like discovered the kid. And apparently I mean, it's entirely possible that like had they not climbed the ladder and not kind of like I think he was rushed, and I think that's probably why he ended up missing the shot or missing the several shots. So, actually, I think three people were injured. Oh, well, two people were injured, and one person was actually killed. And then Trump himself obviously had the minor injury, but so there was somebody. I mean, he actually did hit somebody, but it was not the person he was presumably aiming for. You know,
So much for Trump standing in the way. I thought he was supposed to be stopping them from getting to you by
right?
standing in the way. Apparently not.
Yeah, apparently not. Yeah, no.
Yeah, not that a murder of an innocent person is anything to joke about.
No, no, not at
But
all. Not at all.
yeah, it's. I mean, obviously, we're not just discovering right wing hypocrisy, but wow, there has been rather a lot of that around this, hasn't there?
Well, it's the sort of thing where like the immediate line was the Democrats have been by calling Trump Orange Hitler, by calling him a threat to democracy, they have created the atmosphere that just creates this need to for somebody to come out and do this. And it's like, what have you guys been doing for the last 20 years? Like, what like this is it literally like the whole rhetoric of like the entire right wing is the Democrats are a threat to the nation. The Democrats are a threat to our way of life, often with like literal gun motifs and like a whole bunch of their advertising, their campaign work, their propaganda, the journalism, everything. It's like, and this is like an intrinsically gun culture. Like, it is just a factor. However you feel about gun laws in the United States, it is definitely true that the
And the
Republicans are
Republicans
the
go
party
around
of the
wearing
gun.
AR-15 pins on their
Right.
lapels, for God's sake.
Absolutely. Like Steven Crowder sits and he like does his YouTube show or his Rumble show with like two guns holstered in because like you gotta carry that gun, man. You gotta it's an aesthetic. I mean, and that's what it is. And it's just like, yeah, I mean, to pretend that this is, that like very sober analysis saying that, well, Trump is actually a threat to democracy because we've read the 600 pages of Project 2025. It's the same thing as like decades of, just hyperventilation about, you know, Democrats raising taxes slightly and therefore stealing freedom from millions of Americans. It's just a different thing. And of course, they use this, they're going to use this incident and they're going to use the fact that apparently this kid donated $15 to Act Blue on the eve of Joe Biden's inauguration as well. He was clearly a Democrat. He was clearly a left-wing plant, and then we'll forget that, like, actually he registered Republican when he turned 18 and he has been a Republican for, since then, and actually unsubscribed for that Act Blue mailing list like 2 years ago. So,
And yet, he obviously was trying to murder Donald Trump. I mean, so
right.
that's a pretty good indication that he's not pro-Trump.
Well, right. I don't think that being anti-Trump is like, I don't think that means anti-republicanism in the slightest, but I think that the reality is what I'd really love to have is I'd love to have a motive for you. I'd love to have an explanation for you. I don't have that. Nobody does, so far as I know. There's been no like public release of it. When some of the mass shootings in 2019 and 2020 happened, you got a manifesto. You got something that's kind of going out there. We haven't seen anything like this from this kid. There's been no social media unearthed that was anything. Nobody at a school, like there has been a lot of interviews from people who went to Bethel Park High School who were like, what do you know about this kid? And nobody said he was like overtly political. Is that he was a bit of a contrarian. Like he was kind of a Republican in a sea of Democrats in a lot of like his classes. And so he would take kind of contrarian positions and kind of be the stick in the mud and be the salt in the machine or the sand in the gear sort of thing. But, we don't have like notebooks full or like a web page full of like invective against, the deep state or the immigrants or, anything like that. And, honestly, if you asked me to sort of speculate, which you didn't, but if you asked me to speculate, I think, this is a kid who wanted to feel important for whatever reason. He was apparently bullied at least somewhat in school. I mean, he has this very normal resume for this kind of stuff. And, he just decided to get up there one day and like take a few pot shots just to feel important or something, like, I don't know, like that would be my completely wild guess on this. But I did see, and the reason that really like people were like pointing at me or like asking me questions about it is I forget his name. There was a political commentator with some amount, and I don't know his name. I'd never heard of him before, but he had a number of followers, and he was like posting like, about the shooting in the like minutes and hours afterwards. And he's like, this guy appears to have been a groiper. He's obviously a groiper. And no, like there's no reason to think like there's absolutely. And then they're like, well, he's wearing a groiper t-shirt. And like, what the fuck are you talking about? I actually resisted this for a while because I couldn't find like documentation of it. But he was apparently wearing a shirt from a YouTube channel called Demolition Ranch, which is a, very, we're going to fire big guns and blow stuff up kind of like YouTube channel. I mean, Robert Evans described it as the Mr. Beast of GunTube. And like, if you know Mr. Beast, it's just like, it's all about spectacle. It's all about like, I watched a couple of videos, like in one, they were like sort of like they're like the one that they point you to when you first click on the page is, we fired like the biggest sniper rifle in the world against like a big cube of bronze. And we shot a bunch of guns at this. And we like compared like the impact and I watched the video. It's a fun video. It's like firing big guns at like hard things and seeing like damage. It's explosions and fire and, it's fun, but it's not like, we have to kill the Democrats or we have to kill Donald Trump for the blood of the innocents. And it's certainly not Groiper related. The Groipers are not like huge, like gun nerd enthusiasts. Like these are mainstream. They're trying to use Trumpist attitudes to get into mainstream Republican positions. Like there's no reason to think that a Groiper, even if he was a Groiper, there's no reason to think he would assassinate Donald Trump. I mean, it's just incoherent if you know anything about these subcultures at all. And, when somebody with some degree of gravitas is like talking about that, it's like, what, like, that's why people I think were like asking me, like, what does this mean? And I'm like, no, it doesn't mean anything. That's just stupid. I'm sorry. It's just dumb. Like,
yeah. The fact is we do not know why he did what he did.
And I was irresponsible for even speculating a slight bit. And I understand that, but like, I think I was hesitant to even like do that. I was like, if you made me guess, that's what I would say. But like, yeah, I am not at all trying to like actively speculate on motives. So anyway, please continue.
Yeah, no. I mean, I don't think you are speculating. I think what you're ruling stuff out, and I think that's a perfectly fair thing to do. It's perfectly fair to try to sort of winnow this down based on what we know or don't know, and what we can deduce. The fact is, and then you get into sort of deeper questions about, what does why even mean? Like, Lee Harvey Oswald murdered President Kennedy. Did he do that because he was a Marxist or a communist, or because he thought he was? Or did he do it because he was just aching to be important and have a huge effect on the world and kill somebody? And it just so happened that the president was going to be driving past the book depository where he happened to be working, He tried to kill another guy earlier who was like a right-wing bircher,
Edwin Walker,
and then he decides
Edwin
to kill Kennedy, who's a guy that he'd expressed admiration for. And I do confess to a lot of irritation with like liberal and Democrat, writers and podcasters and YouTube people who are in their own way, and it's less obnoxious and less hypocritical, obviously, because it'd be difficult not to be less those things than the Republicans. But they are nonetheless playing a similar sort of game. So, well, he was a registered Republican. Yeah, that doesn't alter the fact that he was clearly trying to kill Donald Trump. That doesn't make he was a registered Republican. The guy that was shot and killed was a registered Democrat. The fact that you register this affiliation or that affiliation at some point or another, that doesn't necessarily mean anything. It's just this fundamentally misconceived idea that if we can prove that he was one thing or the other, then that will tell us why he did it, and then that will give us this key to understand the wider political situation. No, that's just not how it works.
I really like. Sorry, I'm joking. Believe me, my heart goes out to the families of the people who were injured, the man who was killed, etc., etc. The man who was killed was a former, not a police chief, a fire chief of, I think, Buffalo Springs, Pennsylvania. I don't have that data in front of me, but like it's something like that. But he was a former or current fire chief. Maybe he was the actual target. That would be like completely within the evidence we have right now. Is that no, he was actually trying to get this one guy, because of some personal beef he had, or like a friend of his house was like burned down under this guy's watch, and so he's like actively targeting this guy. Like
That's
if this
that's
is
what it would be if this was a TV show,
if this was a
because it
Law
would
and Order
start out,
episode, if this is a Law and Order
yeah,
episode, that
exactly,
would
yeah,
exactly
yeah.
be the answer. Like, I don't know, we've been programmed by Law and Order to find these things, but like that is completely within the bounds of the evidence that we have right now. Like, there is no reason to think that is not the case by any, except for like the obvious thing is like Donald Trump was injured. And political assassinations are a thing, et cetera, et cetera. But like, that's just us jumping to conclusions on this. There's no reason to assume this has to be a target on Trump himself. So anyway,
Look,
just putting it out there.
Without wanting to sound like I'm spinning an equivalence, it is really fascinating to see and hear liberals and Democrats suddenly embracing the mental illness argument of political violence.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Very enthusiastically. Whereas you don't need to do that, because it is entirely possible that this person was motivated to try to kill Donald Trump by hearing lots of people talk about the fact that Donald Trump is a fascist and a dictator in waiting, and
which is true.
The difference
which is true. Also, by the way, just to let you know,
exactly,
like, this is absolutely true.
This is it. You can't. The fact that you might inadvertently influence somebody to do something like try an assassination attempt, you can't let that mean that you can't talk about things that are true. And what people say about Donald Trump, that he's dangerous, that he's a fascist, that he's an authoritarian dictator in waiting, that he tried to overthrow the American democratic system, that he did this, that he's a rapist, and etc., etc. These are all true things. You can't say, well, I can't talk about that in case it inspires somebody to take the wrong approach to it. It's not, you don't need to deny that might have had an influence on him. It doesn't make you responsible for what he did. It's not comparable to what the right wing have been doing, which is, concertedly and knowingly trying to instigate political violence on a massive scale for the purposes of destroying American democracy, or persecuting and killing oppressed and vulnerable and marginalized populations on the basis of lies about them being organized pedophiles and things like that. It's not comparable.
Yeah, no, it is not. It is not in the slightest. It is not. And it is like, I don't know. I don't like this term, but I think it makes sense. I mean, we're not gonna predefine it, but the blue anon crowd, we're gonna embrace all the like wacky conspiracy theories, but we're going to embrace them from the pro-democratic party, and like that this guy was, a false flag and all that sort of thing. It's like, no, there's no reason to think that. There's no reason, like, doesn't make any sense. It just doesn't make any sense. There's no logic behind it. And like, it's just, I think that I skeeted like right after it happened, like that, that night it happened, is like, I saw the photos, like it was kind of immediate aftermath photos, and I saw like some of the commentary around it. And I was just like, we're going to be dealing with this shit for the rest of our lives. And it was like the blue anon conspiracy stuff. And it's just like, yeah, this is the JFK assassination over and over again. This is all the stuff we can never actually just think of things rationally. It's always got to be some shadowy thing. It's always got to be like this partisan, like everything has to have this partisan angle and all that sort of bullshit. It's just like, I'm so frustrated with, like, we just can't share facts on the ground anymore. We can't, like, have an epistemological, I don't know. I sound like my old like skeptic self right now, don't I? I don't even sound like, because like we know conspiracies happen, like COINTELPRO happened, like there's a ton of stuff that like, came out years later. They came out years later because that's just how these things work. It's like, if you're talking about some shadowy conspiracy that has no, like, conspiracies have a shape, like real world conspiracies have a shape, and you can recognize, if you study conspiracies, you can understand how these things work. And it's not like you don't just get to pick and choose the evidence that works for you. And like, this is I don't know, coming out of that like skeptic movement, I think is just like kind of inured me to some of this stuff. And it's just like, no, I can't believe that. I'm sorry. I just don't,
you got to have a rational material and structural view, or you're gonna end up in the wrong place, not only factually believing things that just aren't true. You're going to end up in the wrong place politically, because that's not the basis of good politics. And yeah, you can, as you say, conspiracies do happen, and we know how they happen and how they work and what they look like and how they pan out. There's sociology on this. One of the things it always makes me think of, this is a bit of a byway, but I like this. It always makes me think of the OJ case, and like people at the time, and for a long time afterwards, they said like, well, OJ was set up by the LAPD, because of racism,
Right.
and he was dating a white woman who, his wife that he murdered was a
Yeah,
white woman
Nicole
that
Nicole
he
Simpson.
abused
Yeah.
and murdered for years. Nicole, that's right. I
Yep.
couldn't
Yep.
remember. And yes, the LAPD in the 80s and 90s was a profoundly racist organization, and I'm sure it's still a racist
Yeah.
organization now because it's a fucking police force.
Thankfully they've
But
completely solved that problem now. It's all in the past. No, not at all. Not in the slightest. But even more
but
so in the 80s and 90s. Even more so in the 80s and 90s.
that's what I was getting at. But the thing is, we know what police racism looks like. We know how it works. It doesn't look like, detectives who don't know each other spontaneously deciding to launch a gigantic conspiracy against a black guy who is a millionaire and an incredibly popular sports hero who is also best friends with the local cops. That's not what it looks like.
I mean,
it
I think
looks like the Rodney King beating.
Yeah, I think there are reasons to think that Mark Furman absolutely like planted some evidence. Like, I haven't looked at that in detail, but from what I've seen of it, I think there's entirely possible that Mark Furman did actually like plant some of that shit. But he framed an innocent man, or he framed a guilty man. He framed a guilty man. There's tons of evidence that O.J. Simpson actually committed that crime. And we don't have to ignore all that and just look at Mark Furman's like very obvious racism and his very obviously bad police work, however you want to describe that, to believe that. And I think, like, I don't know, this feels very simple to me. This is just like being an adult in society. It's just like understanding that like these things, there is, I can be a far left radical and still see nuance, like about like the material world. It's silly. It's ludicrous, but so keep your head on your shoulders. That's all we're saying is just keep your head on your shoulders and don't go off on your skis when you don't have the evidence to like really believe this. You gotta really, know what you're saying and understand the material forces that are actually impacting this world and actually focus on that. And so look, if it turns out that this kid did have police connections or he did, like, if that comes out in another year or two, then yeah, we can talk about that. I think that'd be fascinating. But right now, there's no reason to think this is anything other than some like weird personal motive.
Yeah, and don't generalize from the particular.
Yeah.
And if he turns out to have been a ride or die sort of Hillary Democrat or something like that, you can't generalize from that particular. And people hearing that will say, so, well, you generalize from like right wing mass shooters and stuff like that. That's, as I say, that's different.
Actually,
because that's in a completely different context. That's in the context of a gigantic movement of people who are all sort of sharing in this organized ideology, which is being constantly propagated by a well-funded and constantly churning right-wing propaganda machine. It's not the same thing.
Right. We look at the propaganda machine, like the active propaganda machine, with huge amounts of rhetoric pushing it and like historical antecedents in societies all throughout like Europe in the 20th century, up to and including the actual literal Nazis. And then we point to, the way these historical patterns like revert, and yeah, like, I don't know, maybe it turns out that this kid like saw like a Biden tweet where he's like, we have to target Donald Trump for, like being, for not being president in 2025 and was like compelled to act. But like, that's not where the money lies on this. I'm sorry. It's just not,
I love the idea that like, there's a theory here that he was inspired to go and kill Donald Trump because of a supporters newsletter where in passing on one occasion, Biden, or that is to say, whoever wrote the email, supposedly from Biden, uses the clearly metaphorical phrase, put Trump in the crosshairs or in our sights or whatever it was like that, and thinks, oh, the president wants me to shoot Trump. Whereas, Trump sort of repeatedly stands up and on stage and sort of kill him, go on, kill him, kill people, go and kill them.
Trump
and it's like, you can't blame him for anything.
When Nancy Pelosi and her husband Paul Pelosi were targeted by an actual like person, Donald Trump stood on stage and mocked these people. Like, this is like, these are not, and look, this is not like, we are not trying to be partisans here. We are not like playing the red versus blue game. It's just like, these things are very, very asymmetrical. There's no reason to even think that you can't compare these two phenomena. It's just not a thing. It's like it's silly. It's silly. Yeah. So
Yeah, and liberals and Democrats they're on a hiding to nothing if they try to argue this. You are talking about apples and oranges. These things are not comparable. So moving on from the assassination attempt on Donald Trump to the fact that it happened almost literally on the eve of the RNC conference in Milwaukee, and at that, I mean, that's been interesting in itself. You've been watching some of that, you told me. And at that, of course, JD Vance has been announced as Trump has finally announced his pick for his vice presidential running mate, and it's JD Vance. So what do you make of that?
well, so it's funny that like I did like in preparation for this, I listened to a recent episode of The Daily. The Daily is sort of the daily 30-minute New York Times podcast where they just do whatever's in the news, and obviously they're covering the RNC. And look, again, we are not stands of the New York Times. We know all the problems of the New York Times. This is the shit they're actually good at. Is like they actually have reporters who like follow they can pay reporters to just follow these campaigns around and follow these things around. And these guys are actually like subject matter experts in their own domains. And so they kind of had a reporter on the ground. I believe his name was Matt Bender, which like
Matt Bender's good.
It's not that guy. It's a different guy.
Oh, it's a different Matt Bender.
It's a different Matt Bender. Yeah. I was so wait a minute, Matt Bender? Like, hold on, you're working for the New York Times? Man, I gotta get back in the DMs now, man. No, it's a different guy. And he's
how many Matt Benders are there?
I don't know, at least two. But yeah, he's like, yeah, I've been talking to people from all three. There were kind of three people who were, sort of in the kind of like the late stage mix. And it was Bergstrom and JD Vance, obviously, and I can't remember who was the third.
Rubio.
God, Rubio is so like a nothing to me at this point that I couldn't even remember his fucking name. Like Ted Cruz has a bigger like influence in terms of like my thoughts on politics than what Rubio does. He's just such a nobody. And apparently up to like the hours before, like they announced that they were going to announce, and then even the people, even those like last three, like nobody knew until like an hour or two before the actual announcement was made, which is like remarkable. And apparently Trump is just kind of known for like after he picked Mike Pence in 2016, and I'm getting all this from that daily podcast, so I'm not an expert on this, but apparently after he announced Mike Pence, he then spent like the next day like, hold on, can we pull back on this? Can I make another decision? Like he's very impulsive, very childish in terms of like, really he goes with his gut and he kind of waits the last minute. And so I don't think even Vance knew until like an hour or two before the actual like moment in which he was selected, which is, I mean, it's remarkable. It's kind of amazing that, this is how our political process works. But again, when you have a mercurial intellectual toddler, emotional toddler as the head of the party, that's just sort of how these things go. Like, so yeah. I know there's been a lot of speculation on this in terms of like, was it going to be Haley? Was it going to be, and I think like Rivaswamy.
It was never going to be Haley.
It was never going to be Haley. I think there were people wish casting on that one. Like that's, you hear people talk about like Haley as a potential VP pick. And that's like, sorry to say, like the giant sucking sound of the largest JO motion that you can possibly imagine. That's kind of how I imagine those conversations to go. I kind of thought it was going to be Vivek was kind of like my kind of go-to just because he's been the most like forthright in terms of really supporting sort of a far-right policy or a far-right polity. But Vance is almost as far, but also has been much more sycophantic towards Trump himself, while espousing politics to the right of Trump. He has been very, he has just been licking those boots for the last, couple of years after being a very strong Trump skeptic. He was a very
he called him the American Hitler, and
he was an anti-Trump.
Said you should get your head examined if you voted for him.
No, absolutely.
Yeah,
and apparently that's all water under the bridge now because he's on board. And I think that speaks to really what this speaks to is like Trump. He's not looking for like, I don't know. I think there's a lot going on here, but I think the real thing is like what we're really looking at is like if Trump wins in 2020, if Trump wins in November 2025 forward, it's going to be Trump all the time. And it's going to be Trump, like his personal grievances, like all the like legal issues that he's been thrown his way. very legitimate legal issues about like he tried to overthrow the government, and then like tried to steal an election and did a whole bunch of other terrible shit. All that it's just going to be pointed the other way now. Everybody who ever got in his way, the Supreme Court has like they have set him up. They have set the system up to just give him full reign to do whatever the fuck he wants on that regard. And that's what what we're gonna see for the next 4 years. It'll be Biden. It'll be anybody who ever said a crossword, anybody who ever gotten in Trump's way, everybody who ever pissed Trump off is going to they're going to see like legal action. And all of the judges who ruled against him, everybody. That's what the next 4 years or further is going to be like. And I think one thing that JD Vance tells us, I think it's entirely possible that this is Trump picking a successor. Like he's like saying, this is the next guy because he's loyal to me.
Yeah.
JD Vance is younger than we are. JD Vance is 39. He was by far the youngest person on the short list. And I think that's kind of what's happening. Also, Vance was funded by like Thiel Capital. His Senate campaign was he's a Thiel guy. He's very much aligned with that national conservatism movement, which Trump is not really. I think we might have to do an episode about national conservatism now, like based on if Vance had not been picked, I don't think I would have bothered with it, but I think we're going to have to do a full episode on national conservatism. I was going to suggest it. I think I might plan that for the next full episode out. I've got a couple other ones that I've been kind of low key working on, but like I think we have to do that now just to sort of get into some of those details. But yeah, no, I think this is Trump, like sort of, he's going to be my yes man. He's going to do whatever I tell him to do. He's kind of the next guy after me because he's going to do whatever I tell him to do. And it's him, sort of aligning himself with these national conservatism people. And, that's fucking terrifying, especially with the Project 2025 stuff. And I don't know, we could talk about Project 2025. I have complicated feelings about that, but which I don't want to get into in this context. But I mean, it's bad, but it's bad in different ways than people think it is. So, but no, that's kind of my read on Vance. That's kind of my read on where this is going. If Trump wins, Vance is the heir apparent, and that's the way the cookie crumbles. So yeah, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, very, very, very similar thoughts. My end. I mean, I don't know if Trump is necessarily thinking of Vance as like his successor. The solution to the succession problem that the emperor always has. But I think other people are.
Yep.
I mean, just parenthetically, we were joking about Law and Order plot lines earlier. One of the other things that's happened just recently is that Judge Eileen Cannon in Florida has just dismissed all the entire sort of stolen White House documents case. And it's ironic to me that we have a bona fide case of of an egregious criminal just going free because of a technicality at trial that lets him off owing to a soft judge, an activist judge. And it's, of course, It's not a poor person being allowed to go back on the streets to murder and rape because of a left-wing judge. It's a rich person being allowed back onto the streets to subvert American democracy by a right-wing judge. So it happened, like the Law and Order episodes always happen, but completely ideologically reversed.
Yes, absolutely.
But yeah, with Vance, I think other people definitely have identified him as like one of the possible solutions to this succession issue, which is ironic because I think one of the reasons that Vance got it sewed up is his personal friendship with Don Jr. And I'm sure Don Jr. sees himself as like the heir apparent, but I'm sure he's been advocating for Vance. It's like I Claudius around here with this stuff. But yeah, I think Vance is very connected. He's very ideologically connected. He's connected to Leonard Leo. He's connected all over the place. He's done a good job of sort of connecting himself all over the various wings of this thing. He's connected to Gawker. He's connected to Bannon. He's connected to TPUSA. And of course, as you say, with to and loads of these sort of right-wing techno-libertarian nutcase venture capital people who are influenced. Curtis Yarvin, Mencius Mulbug, this sort of neo-reaction people that our friend Elizabeth Sandifer wrote about.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, and he's part of that, what people have called the new, I mean, rather fatuously, I think, called the new right inside the Republican Party, which is basically just another way of talking about this fascist tendency within, it's not quite MAGA, but obviously it's connected with MAGA. This fascist tendency within the Republican Party now, which is extremely socially, radically socially right-wing, and also isolationist, and is kind of, I think, what that is on a fundamental level. It's like the American far right taking advantage of the fact that America is teetering on the brink of becoming a post-imperial culture to take over the American right wing, which of course for decades has been run by the form of conservatism or reactionary politics, which is suited to an imperial society. And I think Vance has done a very good job of positioning himself in that sort of political milieu.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think that's 100% true. And I think that, I mean, really like what they call, we're not calling it the new right. I mean, I just call them the paleoconservatives, and, ultimately
Grows out of that, yeah.
The former alt-right, I mean, they're very ideologically consistent with the paleoconservatives is what I'm saying. It's like you can draw a straight line between, Sam Francis and, between like Sam Francis and that kind of crowd to the new right. They have the very similar positions. And what they've just done is they've learned from the former alt-right, from this like sort of youth movement, this online youth movement, this kind of flash in the pan thing that we started out studying as like kind of the raison d'etre of this podcast. They've learned from that failure is that we shave off the rough edges. We shave off the roughest of rough edges. We don't talk about Jews. We don't talk about, we talk about, but we share a very like right-wing ideology, a very socially conservative, a very far-right ideology. But we combine that with, this kind of anti-war, anti-imperialist stance. Now, in practice, they're not going to be anti-imperialist in the slightest. They're absolutely going to engage in the same kind of imperialist wars and aggression. They're just going to do it in a more quiet way, and they're not going to like emphasize that as part of their overall plan. So
they're going to do it in a different mode. They're going to do it outside the confines of what used to be called the rules-based international order, which is just another way of saying that they're going to do it in the same way as like Putin and Orban do it. And Orban is another example of somebody that Vance has connections to. He's very pro-Orban. And he's very, via that, there's Tucker Carlson. He's very close with Tucker Carlson. Tucker Carlson's a big advocate for him.
I mean, sorry, this is an aside, but it is connected. It's like, there is like, we don't put troops on the ground. We just hire mercenaries. We just hire BlackRock to go and do the dirty work for us. And I think it speaks volumes in this like kind of cultural moment, in this like political moment, that the attempted assassin Thomas Matthew Crooks was filmed a couple of years ago in the background of a BlackRock video filmed at his fucking high school. Like the idea that, hey, BlackRock is filming like recruitment videos in high schools, and that he's just eventual attempted assassin was just sitting in the background there. Like, who knows what conversations that this kid had with like BlackRock employees in 2022 or whatever. Like this, I mean, it's I don't know, like it's so perfect. It's just like everything is just like so on the nose. So, like you can't even write this. Like, yeah.
And again, it links up because another thing about Vance is that he's one of the best within that far right wing of the GOP at doing the sort of pretense of populist working class politics. He's one of the people that definitely emphasizes that sort of right wing brackets white working class economic populism thing.
I mean, if Trump wins now, we're going to have to do hillbilly elegy for this podcast. You understand that, right?
Well, yeah. And that ties, that's a full circler because it takes us right back to where we started in this podcast. Because one of the things about hillbilly elegy, which is this sort of disgusting, the poor are a bunch of feckless idiots and drug addicts who are poor because they buy massive televisions and stuff like that. And what they need to do is pull themselves up by their bootstraps like me. It's just that age-old dogma. But it was such a big hit, partly because it was embraced by liberals and centrists who loved the idea of like this good conservative, anti-Trump good conservative. And of course, look how that's turned out.
And who liked the idea, this fantasy that Trump's base is, hard scrabble West Virginia white people, and not like, the guys who own the car dealerships in West Virginia. Like those are the people who are actual,
and techno-libertarian venture capital.
I mean, absolutely. It's silly. Another aspect to this that I just want to throw in here, I just want to make sure is said, is like, the fact that Vance is like, he wrote a best-selling book and then also had a movie made out of that book. and is sort of a celebrity in his own right, I think is another thing that like pushes him to the top of Trump's list because, again, I was joking about Marco Rubio that I can't even remember. I remember what his face looks like. I just honestly forgot his name. Like I was literally listening to this podcast like 20 minutes before, and I just completely, completely blanked on like Marco Rubio. Not that he's not terrible and important, but like I just completely blanked on it. JD Vance, for all of his faults, is like he has that like cachet, he has that celebrity to him, and we know that Trump is very enamored in terms of like the look, the look of people, how they're going to come across on TV. I mean, it's kind of his one. I mean, you could say it's his one legitimate talent. The one thing you can actually kind of respect about the guy is, he's always just known how things are going to look on TV, and he displaced Bannon in part not because Bannon he disagreed with Bannon, but because Bannon was kind of slovenly. Bannon didn't put himself together the right way. He was scruffy, and he was, and that's not what Trump wants in him in his life. That's not what Trump sees as like a good person to have around him. And it's very petty, and it's very superficial, and it's very, I mean, fascist in its own way. But it's just a, it's another thing in Vance's favor, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely. And Trump he has this track record of kind of getting crushes on people.
Yeah, he does,
I don't necessarily mean, sexual or romantic crushes, but just in the broader sense. And yeah, apparently he has sort of gushed to Vance about how good looking he is and stuff like this, which is this weird thing Trump has sometimes.
I will say, as a man with a beard, having a bearded American at the top of the U.S. government,
finally representation
for the bearded among us. So I am fully in favor.
Matters.
I am fully in favor of this. Vote Trump Vance now. Unless he shaves, in which case, fuck that guy, because that's just the traitor. Sorry, I was going to go into a very problematic place, and I'm not going to do that now. But yeah, but yeah, no. Yeah, I don't know. Do you have anything else to say? I mean, we could talk about Vance all day, and I think we will have to talk more about Vance down the line. But certainly, I think we've kind of covered like why we think he was picked. So, and sort of what the implications are going to be.
Yeah, he's also got the Catholic, the sort of the right wing Catholic connections as well, hasn't
he? He's got a little bit of that. I think he just sort of calls himself Christian, but he's sort of like aligned himself with this sort of hard right Catholic stuff. I don't know how profound that is or how connected that is. I mean, obviously the Catholic Church is not sort of, I don't think the Catholic Church has a giant presence in West Virginia, Ohio. I mean, I know there are Catholics, obviously there are Catholics there, but I'm not sure what his, if you think about like redneck West Virginia, you're definitely, and I say that with the enormous respect, I'm a redneck from Alabama, but if you think about redneck from West Virginia, you're definitely not thinking like high church Catholic at that point. And so it's a different kind of vibe. So I think that is like, he's shed all that, and he's like embracing his more cosmopolitan, his more city bred, sort of idea, the more elite sides of this. And I think that's interesting as well.
Yeah. I think
his wife is a devout Hindu, like, which is interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's more just an example of this thing that he has where he sort of places himself in lots of different connections. That's what it looks like to me. It looks like he's a guy who's sort of like, he approaches politics as like, LinkedIn or networking or something like that. You put a pin in this thing and then you put a pin in that thing over there, and you end up with loads of pins, and you can, join them up where necessary. He's connected. I mean, I know they all do this, but he seems to be particularly good at it. He's a very, very, very stupid man, but he's like Trump. He has his talents, and it seems to me that one of his talents is sort of putting these pins in different places and connecting himself to lots of different things and people at once.
Yeah, no, I would agree for sure. Yeah, no, Vance is. I got one more thing for you. I got one more very brief note.
Okay.
Trump made his first appearance since the attempted shooting at the RNC. He did not give a speech, but he did give his first appearance. And through like thunderous applause, he shows up and just sort of like sits at the dais. And he does have the bandaged ear, which I am certain is medically necessary. I'm not like we're not playing that game. I am certain that is medically necessary at this point. But he does have the bandaged ear, and people were chanting while they're just sort of like waiting for him to kind of come with their chanting, "Fight, fight, fight, fight," which is what he chanted from the end. I mean, this is
he improvised that.
Again, how do you possibly Like, I've never been shot at like that. Like, if somebody shot me in the ear from behind while I was like, while I was doing this podcast, somebody shot me in the ear, and like 3 seconds later, I jump up and yell like, fight, fight, fight. Like, that is an
Well,
instinct. That is an instinct that like very few people on this planet have. I mean, and that's again legitimate. Like, the guy, he's a nincompoop. He's a fascist. He's a horrible, horrible human being. He's got that skill. He's got that, like, get up on his feet and do that to him, because
he's a psychopath, and psychopaths have very shallow emotions, so they don't experience fear the same way you and I do.
Right. Yeah. Well, but yeah, no, I thought that's very telling. That's very telling. I didn't watch a ton of the RNC Day one, but I watched some clips, and that was very, very interesting to me. That, you did have like huge portions of the crowd.
Some of his posts have been hilarious. His posts have been like, the doctors were telling me it's the most amazing thing they've ever seen. Anybody else would be dead. And a lot of people are saying it's the most iconic photograph ever taken. And I survived. And most people have to die to get an iconic photograph. He is so happy. He's just over the fucking moon. He's enjoying himself. Well, like you have never had as much fun as Donald Trump is having right now. He
knew in the moment that he could spin it. Like he knew. I mean, it's just, I don't know. He's got that instinct, and it's just like, it's disgusting, but it is the thing. And it's really great that the Democrats just said, "Oh yeah, we're just not going to campaign against him anymore. We're just, we're going to pull all ads." It's like
fucking typical Democrats.
Yeah, don't do anything. It's great.
Well, we're going to have to accept responsibility for what happened. We're going to have to accept responsibility for causing this assassination attempt, because anything else would just be politically indecent, or I don't know, anti-Semitic or something. I don't know, but we're just going to have to admit and beg forgiveness. That's the only politically sensible thing we can possibly do.
Exactly. Well, I think I'm done. I think we've gone far enough on this one. So, yeah.
Okay. Well, thanks for listening, everybody. That was I don't really have the nerve to call that a news brief. It was just a chat brief, or a shoot the shit brief, or whatever it was. But I hope you enjoyed it. It certainly felt good to me to talk to Daniel again after a little bit of a break, and get some stuff out of the old system. So I hope you got something out of it as well. And we will be back with you with something or other. It might be another news brief, or another chat like this, or it might be another bonus, for people that chuck us as little as $1 or to one of our Patreons. We've been
prepping the bonus
movie, probably.
We've been prepping the bonus on Frost Nixon, which is a 2000s movie at least. So,
Yeah, directed by Ron Howard, director of Hillbilly Elegy.
Yeah, we could talk about, man, that's a God. This is it's just a shit show. The whole thing is a shit show. Like, what the fuck are we doing in this world anymore? But yeah, no, lots of content and prep. Sorry, we've been very like lax on this, but it's not because we're not doing the work, and it's not because we're not trying. It's just like things just keep getting in the way. But yeah, we're definitely going to come back for more content. I think the news brief episodes are like, I think we're going to have to do some more of those before November. I think there's no way we're not going to want to sit and like chat for an hour about like whatever the fuck is going on in the news for the next 4 months. So expect a lot more of these, I think.
So tune in for those, and thanks for listening to this one. Bye-bye, everybody. Goodbye, Daniel. See ya.
Cheers.
That was I Don't Speak German. Thanks for listening. Follow us in all the places you usually follow podcasts. For now, at least, we're both still on Twitter. I'm @_Jack_Graham_, and Daniel is @Daniel E. Harper. And the show's Twitter is @IDSGpod. If you want to help us do the work we do, and gain a few benefits along the way, we both have Patreons. And our theme music is by Loon the Band.